Accidental Talmudist wisdom you don't want to miss. Now my pal Sal, take it away.
On today's episode of the AT Podcast, my guest is Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, the Chabad Rabbi in Belgravia, London, England. He's got a new book called On Purpose, which is fascinating. The discussion that we had today, I know you're going to enjoy because it's not only healthier to have purpose and meaning in your life, it's necessary. And as a result of this conversation, you might just come closer to finding your purpose and meaning and path in this world. Enjoy. Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, welcome to the AT Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rav Sal. Great to be back.
This is your second time on the podcast. We had a wonderful discussion about your last book, Positivity Bias. And today you've got a new book that we're going to talk about, On Purpose. Was it written on purpose?
Thank you for noticing the different layers of meaning in the title. But yes, absolutely. It was written to address, I think, what to my mind might be one of the most urgent questions for our generation, which is how do we live with purpose and how do we live on purpose? Deliberately, thoughtfully, in alignment with the reason our individual soul made its way down to this beautiful earth, sent here as a divine ambassador of divine consciousness to touch, to illuminate, to elevate the environment, our neighborhoods, our families, the people, places, and experiences.
You know, I'm always excited to see you, just so that people know, my rabbi is your brother. And I just feel like I'm a member of your family and you're a member of mine. So it's always good to see you, but particularly to have this conversation. Because it's a teaching of mine that I share with the AT community very often. That, what was the first commandment? The first positive commandment, Peru Uruvu, to be fruitful and multiply. Now, if that only meant have kids, it would have sufficed to say Ruvu. What's Peru? What does it mean to bear fruit in this world? Not everybody is blessed to have children, but everybody can be blessed to bear fruit because that means to fulfill that mission, as you just said, that mission that we were sent into this world. And we have to keep asking ourselves, what is my mission? Who am I? What can I do? What is the unique contribution that only I can make? And the answer to that is not simple, and it may well not be obvious. But if we keep asking that question, answers will begin to come. God is always speaking to us in the language of events. And if you keep asking that question, who am I? What is the unique fruit that I can bear in this world? You'll start to learn it. Now, I would not be surprised if this jives with what you're talking about in On Purpose.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, I've been traveled quite a bit and spoken to many different audiences around the world. Inevitably, during a Q&A session, the question will arise, Rabbi, how do I find my purpose on this earth? How do I know why I'm here? And I began to, early on when I began to study the Rebbe's Torah, the Torah of the Lubavitcher Rebbe of righteous memory, it became clearer and clearer and clearer that literally on every page is embedded one re-emerging theme, and that is how to discover divine providence and the divine purpose in every moment, in every encounter, in every relationship, in every event, in every high, in every low, in every setback, in every struggle, in every triumph. It's so deeply moving and inspiring. And as I grew older and I began searching internally for the answer to this question in my life, I began to collect different sources, different stories, different letters that the Rebbe had written to people, different yichidusin or private one-on-one audiences. And I began to see different themes emerge. And I tried to codify those themes, and that led me to this book. So there's an entire section, the middle section, that is an incredible manual to help each individual identify the indicators, the clues, the principles and many practices that can, through a particular strategy and methodology that's outlined in the book, coalesce to produce tremendous insight and the crystallization of the synchronicity that we each have between body, soul, and between our purpose and our life.
So you know that my next question is, give us an example.
So I'm going to give an example, but let me really actually take a moment to step back and explain why this book is so important, I think, for our generation at this time in history.
Okay.
So first and foremost, I would say it's there's a lot of research today that demonstrates that so many of the things we used to take for granted in the Jewish tradition as basic wisdom, as common sense, derived from our tradition. Today, social science is actually demonstrating how those values, those rituals, those practices have immense psychological benefits for mental health, emotional health, psychological health, spiritual health, and so on. And so I find that actually social science is, if you will, catching up to religion at this time, at this unique time in history, because we now have ways to study and to measure the brain and the reactions and responses to various stimuli in real time.
Okay.
So it's no longer just intuition, or it's no longer just ancient wisdom. Today it's actually, if you will, it actually intersects and coincides with some of the modern cutting-edge research.
I mean, could we save, I'm not trying to sum it up, but will we say that it's true that somebody who feels purpose and meaning in their life is literally going to be healthier?
Literally. I'm not going to show you all the data, but suffice it to say that emerging research has shown that having a purpose in life improves one's mental and physical health. It lowers the risk of cognitive decline, which is, of course, something that so many people are thinking about as we get older.
My mother, I lost the last 10 years of her life because she had frontal lobe dementia. I mean, she was there, but we couldn't have that kind of daily conversation like we like to have. I was so close with her, and that was very difficult. So if you're telling me that having a purpose in life can forestall cognitive decline, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's not me. It's actually some of the great experts. It also betters our sleep, which we know is so deeply connected to our physiological health. It enhances resilience, of course, self-esteem, but it also decreases chances of anxiety and depression, which again is one of the things that are so prevalent in today's day. But
Which is probably also associated with addictive behavior.
100%.
Right.
Without a question, because very often the addictive behavior, the problem is not the addiction, the problem is what causes the addiction. The problem is what
are they treating?
What are they treating? It's the cause. What am I escaping into? Why do I feel so much angst internally that I can't bear to be with myself, and therefore I have to, as it were, medicate or numb myself from the existential pain, much more so than the physical pain. It's actually very interesting because, if I were to come out with a product to the marketplace tomorrow, and I'd say, here's a pill, and if you take this pill, your chances of your life will extend by up to 7 years. I'd become an international sensation without a question. Who wouldn't want to live another 7 years? And what's very interesting is that's what the science shows today, that living with a sense of purpose can extend your life by 7 years. Just to put that in context, physical exercise comes in at a close second 6.9 years. So to put it somewhat facetiously, if you live with a sense of purpose, that's as important, if not more important, than physical exercise. And what's amazing is that we live in a wonderful world where there's so much consciousness around physical fitness. Everybody has a membership to one gym or to the one they go to, the one they don't go to. But a sense of purpose is equally, if not more important. And I write a little bit more about that in the introduction, where I highlight or accentuate the meaning and the symbolism of the cover of the book, where you see this on button. And what I point out is that much like an on button for a laptop or a computer, which takes a bunch of different pieces of silicon on plastic and metal, and with the on button activated, suddenly turns into one of the most powerful devices of connectivity. You have access to all the information in the world, etc. In a similar sense, to some extent, living with purpose and living on purpose is the button that activates the human soul and spirit. That is to say, we suddenly are not just random different parts, instincts, appetites, achievements, talents, and so forth, but they all coalesce to become the most powerful driving force known to humankind, known to the universe. And so living with purpose has tremendous benefits, and it actually extends our lives. And this is interesting. There's an author of a book called The Happiness Equation, and she writes that the two most dangerous years in your life are the two most dangerous years in your life are the year you're born, because of infant mortality, and the year you retire. How interesting.
Just statistically speaking,
Yeah.
these are the most dangerous years.
It's fascinating, and it's a very important piece of information, because so often, so much of our lives, we're looking forward to the golden era, to the twilight era, to the time where we can just sit back and kick back and just sort of enjoy and
Yeah,
relax.
and it's good for a week. And then somebody wakes up in his retirement community in Florida.
Because what's missing often is that sense of purpose.
Yeah.
A person could have attached their sense of purpose to a career that spanned 50 years. And suddenly, there's nowhere to go. They don't have a structure, a framework to exercise and to manifest their talents and their sense of drive and their sense of service and their sense of connection or community and so on. So that's why it's essential to be aware of how important living with purpose is, because that then enables us to begin the search for purpose. Without knowing how important it is, I think some people think of it as a luxury or an add-on, or, okay, someone who has a sense of purpose is lucky. I'm not that lucky. That's not my lot. I'm just going to get on with living life. But no, if we see it as an essential and integral part of well-being and mental, emotional, let alone spiritual health, we're going to prioritize the search for purpose that much more.
I have a feeling that the world has moved a little forward in this regard, in the sense that perhaps in the 70s and 80s, it might have you would have needed to make this case a little bit harder, a little bit more often, that you need to have a sense of purpose. I think now more people in the world would instinctively agree. Yes, I agree with you. I need a sense of purpose. My problem is I'm not sure what my purpose is. I feel like I'm floating. I can sense that this job or this gig or this endeavor that I've got myself on, this project, it's not it. It's not the one. I'm not living consonant with my purpose. So how do I find it?
So that's a great point, and it's a great question. I think I'd agree with you without a doubt that we live at a time where more people are conscious and are already in search for their purpose. And here too, let me step back and share what I believe is one of the reasons or one of the contributing factors. Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory, whose yard site was last week, his fourth yard site. So he spoke a lot about how we live currently in a world he would call it a post-secular world, where the experiment of secularism is well behind us. And now we could objectively look back with hindsight and analyze, well, what were the benefits, what were the perks, what were the offerings, and what were the downsides? And so he would talk a lot about, we all know the benefits. The benefits were, in many cases, human rights, individuality, etc. But some of the voids, the gaps that it left in its wake, is that in the modern world, many people who are not tethered to any kind of organized or formal tradition or religion, they tend to suffer or struggle at least with finding a sense of meaning in their lives, purpose, belonging, identity, community. Those are some of the most essential ingredients to human well-being. And unfortunately, in the absence of what once was the normative, traditional source for all of those nutrients, those emotional and soulful nutrients and ingredients, where does one get them today? And I think actually that, I think today a lot of people look to, for example, sports for that. I'll never forget in the UK where I'm living, there's a very famous football team called Chelsea Football. And they once had a sign hanging in their stadium, Chelsea is our church.
Yeah, and they meant it.
Stamford Bridge is our church and Chelsea is our religion.
Yeah.
Right? And they had to take it down because there was a lot of backlash.
Or Bruce Springsteen is often known as great rock star. And his concerts, he welcomes everyone to the church of rock and roll.
There you go. And there is a sense, if you will, when your team wins, there's a sense of tribalism. That's where you get your sense of identity from, your particularism, the us versus them mentality, sometimes to a great fault. The sense of a bond with, or a transcendent bond with a collective. Where do you get that in the modern world? But if I was once at a Chelsea game, it was the one and only game I went to, but the fellow, Drogba, who was a player for Chelsea, scored a goal. And in unison, as one, tens of thousands of people stood up and they experienced a moment of coalescence, of collective. And there's such a deep satisfaction in that moment. And I remember after the game walking out and I see a person on the phone literally jumping for joy, sharing with their friend what Drogba had done. And I stopped for a moment and I thought, Drogba doesn't know you. You actually have no real connection to him. He will never know you, but yet you feel this attachment, this loyalty, this sense of identity, this sense of purpose, this sense of community. So sports is one, and I think unfortunately over the past few decades, politics has become the new religion.
I can see where this is going.
100%. That's where you're seeing the tribalism come through. It's like either this candidate is all good or he's never good or no good. There's a total lack of nuance. It's a total lack of, let's judge him or her based on this, that, and the other. And this is my team, and you're on the other team. And that's why you get very negative rhetoric coming from both sides about those who don't share their perspective, which unfortunately is one of the downsides historically of a certain fanaticism, religious fanaticism that has now crept into politics. Again, identity, purpose, belonging. You know how they couch the election as this is the last election, this is the most important election.
Yeah, and there's definitely a religiosity to it. And use the word tether. That's a great word. Nina and I often talk about this. A Jew untethered from Torah will seek, a bolt to attach his tether to. There is this need, and it's not just Jews, of course. There's this need in the human to believe in something, to attach himself to something greater, to believe that her role in this world is guided by objectively true principles. And when it's untethered from what we've known to be true for thousands of years, it can easily become tethered to something new, something unproven, and something ultimately dangerous.
And that's exactly right, because if you ask me, the past year we have seen where the drive for purpose can end up, unfortunately, if not guided correctly. I think on all the campuses where we've seen this sense of fanaticism, young people marching in the streets, under the banner of goodness, under the banner of morality, under the banner of this is our Vietnam War, under the banner of this is the cause du jour. We're willing to get arrested. We're willing to, all of that kind of thing. Where's that really coming from? Yes, in some cases, it's definitely malicious. It's definitely sinister, no doubt. There's real hardcore anti-Semitism, and that's real, and it's not something to gloss over. But in many cases, and I can't even propose to suggest the numbers, the percentages, but in a very large percentage of people marching at these protests that really revolt and they threaten and they intimidate the Jewish community and anyone on the side of goodness and decency, where there's this terrible toxic inversion of perpetrator and victim, etc., and slanders and blood libels we thought were things of ancient history are resurfacing, reemerging, coming from where? Not from what we originally thought would be the source. Some would say the far right, or those who are maybe illiterate, or those who are not, they don't have a seat at the table of advancement, progressivism, liberalism, education. When you have the three leaders of universities sitting in Congress, televised for the whole world to see, fail to be able to call out calls for Jewish genocide and instead talk about context, well, what we're seeing, I think, in many of those individuals is a certain misapplication or misdirection of something very noble and very good. It's the seeking of purpose. What's my purpose? And in other words, the good news is that the intention may actually be good. The bad news is that, unfortunately, they're being fed the wrong narrative, and therefore they're attaching themselves to a very toxic and very dangerous cause. But again, where is all that coming from? In other words, we're living at a time where I believe you're absolutely right. Young people are more attuned to the search for purpose. generations ago, we lived at a time of hyper-materialism, where young people were just interested in getting a good job and living a good life and making a lot of money and having second homes, cars, holidays, and so forth. Now, I think young people are very attuned to the desire to make a difference.
Yeah.
I'll share with you one little anecdote, then we'll go a little deeper. So I interviewed for a position at our organization, probably 30 or 40 young people. And what's fascinating about almost all of them is when I asked them, why are you leaving your previous job to come here? Almost all of them said, well, I lacked a sense of satisfaction and impact where I was working previously. I didn't feel a sense of purpose there. I didn't feel I was actualizing my fullest potentials. And, at first I was thinking to myself, who is advising these people? Imagine someone tells you, I know you have a job that needs to get done, but what I'm looking for here is actually purpose, impact, satisfaction, self-actualization. That's kind of the wrong thing to tell a potential employer who has a job that needs to get done within an organization, right? But that's what they're saying, and I don't think they don't even realize what they're saying. But what they're really saying, to me at least, is I'm willing to forfeit job security and a good check if I'm not feeling fully utilized, fully impactful. So I think subconsciously, perhaps, we live at a time where this idea, this message, this theme, and this objective, and this goal is so necessary. And that's why I think, please God, it will resonate. And there's one other element to this, which I think is very important. We also live at a time where I think what we have found is that a lot of people, I'm just going to read a little something from the book because I think it might be useful. In the 1950s, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, he said something that I think is prescient, even prophetic. It was an incredible diagnosis of the younger generation. And he said that the great challenge of today's youth is the sense of inadequacy that they carry. In the Hebrew, mi ani ma ani, which translates as, who am I? What am I? Incredible. That's the greatest overarching challenge of our youth, the Rebbe diagnosed in 1950. And then decades later, we start to hear about self-esteem, self-worth, self-actualization. All of that begins to manifest. And there's a whole host of ancillary, resultant issues, ills, potential ailments, social ailments that have resulted from that deep sense of inadequacy.
Wait, if I could just cut in for 1 second, because you remind me so strongly of the classic teaching from Pirkei Avos by Hillel, right? So if I am not for me, who will be for me? This is very familiar, even in the Jewish world. People who had 1 year of Hebrew school before they had a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, they've heard this teaching. And if I am not for me, who will be for me? And then the next line, if you're not in the Orthodox world, and that's a made-up word, right? I mean, it's just a traditional world. But in let's say the non-traditional world, this always gets translated, the next line, as, and if I am only for me, what am I? And if not now, when? The Hebrew doesn't say that. It doesn't say, if I am only for me. What the Hebrew says, and if I am for me, what am I? So why is that only stuck in there? Because they want to make it into a teaching about social justice. Now, social justice is very important. We do have to do that work. We do have to make sure that people who are hungry get food and people who are unsheltered get sheltered. But that's not what Hillel was saying. What Hillel was saying is, if I'm not for me, who will be? And he was talking about, if I'm not going to build this sense of purpose, if I'm not going to connect to God and the tradition and fulfill the commandments and do the work in this world that I'm commanded to do so that I can build for myself, an estate, shall we say, in the world to come. Build a portion for myself. No one can do it for me. You can inherit money from your father, but you can't inherit your portion in the world to come. You have to build that yourself. So then if you decide that you will do it, and if I am for me, then the next question, it's not a sarcastic rhetorical question, well, if I'm only for me, what kind of lousy person am I? No. And if I am for me, if I am going to do that work, what am I? right? What are my clues from the soul and the body and the person and the personality that God sent me into this world with? That's where I'm going to get my clues of my sense of purpose.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to get right back into that because that's actually really quite a summation of the book. But I want to add one other layer to, I think, the unique challenge, and that's going to, I think, frame the refreshing potency of the Rebbe's perspective and what's written into and across every page of this book. And that is that, this is a little section from one of the chapters, I'll read if it's okay. Today, due to the entrenchment of dominant theories regarding human origin and development, our identity is perceived as something we must struggle to construct during the course of our lives. This approach to identity formation was championed by framers of our depersonalized sense of self, including Aristotle, Darwin, and Freud. Tracing back as far as ancient Alexandria and built through centuries of theoretical inquiry, these men ultimately crystallize a narrative that says we are merely the product of accidental intersections between biological, evolutionary, and psychological imperatives. This view has manifested more recently in the popular notions that we are a random dance of particles, probabilities, and genetic expressions. Together, these men birthed a paradigm that ceaselessly hammers home the notion that we come into this world bereft of any true value or intrinsic nobility. Even as scientific theories behind this dour sentiment have evolved and shifted over the years, the resulting view that we are fundamentally insignificant continues to be reinforced. Take Stephen Hawking, one of the great scientific celebrities of our time. He summarized it thusly: the human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant that I cannot believe the whole universe exists for our benefit. So based on this cynical worldview, we're told that if we want to be somebody, that somebody has to be crafted, it has to be curated, it has to be cobbled together. And all of this interpersonal effort amounts to an impossible attempt to become, through our own efforts, what the Rebbe insists we already are at birth, inherently, infinitely, innately, and irrevocably valuable, worthy of love, and divine by design. In the Rebbe's own words, our sages teach that each and every soul was in the presence of his divine majesty before coming down to this earth. The souls are hewn from under the seat of glory. This is but one of so many sayings that encapsulate the counterpoint, the antithesis of the previous notion that has just trickled down into the consciousness of, I think, younger generations who are seeking purpose. Somehow intuitively they know they have a purpose, but yet they've been told through the proliferation of these scientific psychological theories that any real value they have is not innate, but has to be constructed. And that's
has to be constructed, and therefore, if you go wrong, if you don't do the work, if you're not lucky enough to have a situation where you can build purpose, then you're out of purpose.
Exactly right. And so, if you were to ask me, what is the one? Is there a one line, one sentence that encapsulates the entire book? And by the way, that might be an interesting question to ask authors in general. It's a difficult one, but in this case, it's actually made easy. And that line is that the day you were born is the day God decided that the world cannot exist without you. That is the one line.
Rabbi Nachman?
It's actually a paraphrase, not a literal quote, but a paraphrase from the Rebbe's teachings. And I can't emphasize how prevalent that theme is. Once you know it, you'll see it everywhere in the Rebbe's teachings. That's the beauty of it. This idea that each and every one of us is invested with a point of infinity, of divinity, of perfection, of spiritual innocence, integrity, and majesty. But more so, each one of us was sent to this world, to this earth, with all its brokenness, with all its confusion, with all of its chaos, because there's a portion of this world that was allocated to each one of our souls is radically redemptive and empowering. And there's an amazing Hebrew phrase that we gloss over so often, but is so profound, and the Kabbalists talk about this in this context. And that is, each one of us has been given chelko ba'olam, their portion in this world. Right? It's as if Hashem has allocated, not just geographically, but also socially. There are certain souls, and we'll get to this later perhaps, co-travelers on our journey through life that were designated and predetermined. And that's such a beautiful way of looking at those people who God placed in our life. There's a chapter called The People in your life, from family to friends to acquaintances to
Right, so your
varying degrees.
soulmate, your soulmates. It's not just your mate.
Exactly right.
Your friends, your family, your teachers, that these people also.
Exactly. And this gives added dimension and depth to one of the most famous teachings in Pirkei Avot, which is who is wealthy, he who is happy with his lot. It should have just said he was happy with what he has. No, it says hasameach bichelko.
With his
Who
portion.
rejoices with his portion. Which portion? His portion in the world. That's his or her to touch, to elevate, to illuminate, to nurture, to cultivate. So this teaching really is the essence of the book and the essence, I think, of the Rebbe's Weltanschauung as it pertains to human dignity, to human purpose, to the story, the arc of history, and our specific place within all of it. And the rest, as they say, is commentary.
Speaking of Hillel.
Yes. So, the way I put it actually is that, Viktor Frankl has a great line on this. He says, everyone has his own specific vocation or mission in life. Therein he cannot be replaced, nor can his life be repeated. I don't know if he had any inkling as to how deeply Kabbalistic that notion is. That is quite literally what different Kabbalistic texts elucidate. And by the way, just as an aside, that explains the very Jewish idea of reincarnation. Why would a soul come back to this world? Because in a previous lifetime,
There was unfinished work.
But if there's unfinished work, let someone else finish it. Why do I have to come back down? Isn't that powerful? What it's saying is that you're indispensable, not just to the story of your life, but to the story of the universe and its entire trajectory. And so, interestingly enough, sometimes looking from the outside, people look into traditional Judaism or any religion and they say, well, it strips you of your sense of agency, of individuality, of your sense of import. Couldn't be more false. It couldn't be more false. To the contrary, Judaism and mysticism in Judaism and the Rebbe's teachings in particular say, not only do you matter to yours in your life, you matter to the lives of everyone alive today, but also to everyone who ever lived and who will ever live. Talk about an outsized sense of, a deep, profound sense, a global, cosmic sense of import, of history, of agency. And there are so many different teachings on this. I'll share one little one that always resonated with me, and that's a fascinating teaching about Joseph of the Bible, who, as we know, was one of the characters of the Torah who probably suffered the most. He went through every single emotion.
Sold by his brothers.
Attempted fratricide. He was kidnapped. His brothers, literally, as the Torah says, hated on him. And it all culminated, of course, when they sold him into slavery. And we can well imagine when he's on that carriage, bumping his way down to Egypt, he surely would have thought to himself, I will never see my family again. Under normal circumstances, a reunion would be impossible. Anyhow, he makes his way down to Egypt. And we all know he's bought by a very prominent individual in Egyptian society. Eventually, he rises to the ranks of great prominence within the estate. And the wife of this individual takes a liking to him, and she tries to seduce him, and he resists her attempts. But actually, Rabbinic Judaism here shares that it's not as simple as he said no, and that was the end of it. In fact, there's a certain strain of Talmudic thinking that suggests that he actually, at some point, was willing and was ready to succumb to her designs. And it is here that Talmud introduces a fascinating image, and it shares that he was just about to fall prey to her passes when suddenly the image of his father entered his mind, and that was what gave him the courage to close the door on that sin. And then we know that she accused him of violating her, and he ends up in prison and so on. But let's analyze that for a moment. There's a talk where the Rebbe explained that there's a Talmudic reference that the face of Jacob was as beautiful as the face of Adam, the first human. Seems like an interesting correlation or parallel, but when you go deeper, what the Rebbe is really saying here is that when Jacob saw the face of Jacob, what he was really seeing was the face of Adam through Jacob. And it's then that he stopped for a moment and he said, look, I'm a 17-year-old boy. I'm alone. I've been basically excommunicated from my family. And so he had every reason, he had every excuse to fall prey to his lower appetites in that moment. A little bit of connection, a little bit of love, right? What wouldn't anyone do in his situation? And he was able to overcome that because he recognized in that moment, through meditating on Adam, the first human being, that our actions do not just affect our own immediate life, but our actions have echoes and reverberations throughout all of human history to the end of time. Think about it for a moment. Adam may have thought to himself, well, okay, fine, this is a little temptation, there's a little struggle. Okay, he took from the tree and that was it. That was not it. Ever since, the story and the landscape of humanity was forever transformed and downgraded till such time that Mashiach will come. And that's what Yosef meditated on. When he saw the face of his father, he recognized the cosmic impact and the historic effect of one deed. And it's then that he said to himself, I'm no longer going to put on my Joseph hat. I'm going to take that off for a moment. I'm going to put on my humanity hat, my historical hat. I'm going to recognize that I'm part of, that my action has a tremendous
And he also
impact.
knew that he was a part of this family.
For sure.
And that this family was a mission-driven family.
For sure.
And that Abraham had come and changed the world and drew so many people to him and really transmitted to Yitzchak, who transmitted to Jacob, who transmitted to Joseph.
Yes.
We have a mission.
Yes.
You know, it's not just us as individuals,
Correct.
but we're bringing something into the world that God entrusted to us. And you could have so easily abandoned that mission
Yes.
when 10 of his brothers said, yeah, well, you're out.
Right.
You know, well, whatever this mission is, I guess I'm not part of it.
Right.
But he didn't.
He didn't. So, you know, I think with all of that in mind, I think the question then of what is my individual purpose becomes very, very pressing. Now, we also live at a time where it's a very challenging question to answer. And that's because we live at a time where, unlike in previous times, I wanted to share with you a little bit of data on this because it's interesting, that, you know, we live at a time where we're finding our mission is an overwhelming affair because we live in an ever-expanding, hyper-connected reality with, for example, mobile technologies putting the world with all of its problems, with all of its possibilities into the palm of your hand, right? So, for example, this is interesting. A weekday edition of the New York Times contains more information about the world than the average person was likely to come across during an entire lifetime in the 17th century.
Well, and that's not that long ago.
It's one weekday edition of the New York Times. Think about that for a moment, you know? So, and that's the number of registered mobile broadband subscriptions around the world increased from 268 million active users in 2007 to an estimated 7.3 billion connections in 2023. So more and more people have access to these technologies. All right, in 2012, more data was transmitted across the internet each second than was stored in the whole internet during the previous 20 years.
Okay.
So as our awareness of the world dilates faster than most can keep up with, the question of our individual purpose and contribution can become paralyzing, right? And this has resulted in, I think, a certain paralysis, purpose paralysis. Mm-hmm. And that is shown by a very interesting study that shows that actually 40% of Americans say that they don't have a sense of purpose at all. That's pretty tough. That's very difficult. That's almost 1 out of 2 people struggles with this. And that's because when you do decide, okay, I'm going to look for my purpose, where do you look, right?
Right.
And I think that's a very interesting, that's an interesting added challenge for the times we live in. And here again, Judaism has such a distinct solution, okay? And that's included in one of the chapters of the book. But I would start with and summarize this chapter by the following line. The Rebbe would teach, ask not how can I change the world, the in capital letters. Instead, ask how can I change my world. Mm-hmm. That's the key operative switch. That's the paradigm shift that helps us narrow the focus of our search, which ironically is a much more effective and, as it were, providential direction to look or search for our individual purpose. So this is something I think that people struggle with today, because very often you find people looking for purpose, they end up in different parts of the world, looking after causes relating to other kinds of problems or issues that are not necessarily immediate, let alone local. When you talk about who do we celebrate as people of purpose? Very often, people who are working on solving, hunger here or AIDS there, and so on. These are all incredibly noble efforts and endeavors, without a question. But if a person wakes up in the morning and is beginning their search, the first place to look, according to the mystics, is look right where you are, right around you, because this reflects one of the great principles, what I call the golden rule of spiritual consciousness, which is in Hebrew hashgacha pratit, which means divine providence or synchronicity, which tells us that essentially every single aspect of creation, of history and humanity, is orchestrated by a hidden hand of providence. There's a great line that coincidence is God's way of choosing to remain anonymous.
Exactly.
So the first place to look, and you alluded to this earlier, is actually internally, at your own life. And this, I think, is also counterintuitive, because very often when we think of finding our purpose, we think, I must explore, I must seek a guru, a therapist, a life coach, even a rabbi. I must seek answers outside of myself.
Someone who will tell me what my purpose is.
Exactly. In fact, there's a fascinating letter of the previous Rebbe to a young man named Tzvi Einbinder, who asked the previous Rebbe, how do I find my purpose? And he outlines 10 pointers, 10 clues to help you discover your purpose in life.
Okay.
It's a fascinating letter. I'm going to share it with you. But the book actually, essentially the middle section of the book, takes these 10 points and expands even further. There's more than 10, or some of them are broken into different aspects or elements. The first is to whom this person was born, your family. Right? This is such an important point. So often in life, we tend to seek our purpose outside of our family. Right? So there's so many people, therapists themselves, life coaches themselves, communal leaders, activists, that find the deepest sense of satisfaction and the location where their purpose comes alive is actually when they leave their homes, when they go out to work with inner city children, or when they go and work on, solving the water crisis in Africa. But you have children at home that need your love, that need your attention, that need you to be present. And so often there's a real exchange, and there's a real compromising of the family unit for the so-called grandiose purpose that I'm finding elsewhere. And this is a grave, grave mistake from the spiritual point of view, because the first indicator of where your purpose lies, that is to say why your soul came into this world, is who are the souls God entrusted you to shepherd, to care for, to guide, to look after. So
that's why I've seen so many times, and it's always, it's so shocking to somebody kind of in this non-frum, this non-religious world, that an important rabbi comes to town, and everyone gathers to hear the words of wisdom, and the rabbi enters, everyone rises out of respect. The rabbi goes to the lectern and begins to teach, and his phone rings. And in the middle of his lecture, he takes it out and he says, "Yes, honey, what's happening?" Because he takes that call from his wife, even in the midst of the lecture. That's a great man. Not everyone is so great that he can do that. But it...
Sorry, I don't know that one.
You turn off that microphone. I wonder why. But yes, there's so much work to be done in the home.
Exactly, and I think it's part of the conditioning of our society that celebrates impact in terms of the global rather than the local. Who are the people who win the great awards or accolades or prizes and are recognized for their achievements to world betterment? Very often, those celebrations are for activities or initiatives that are global, or that take place in the furthest corners or reaches of the universe. There is no, Nobel Prize for being a good father or mother, and that's a problem. Because I think if we were to be conditioned to look at our family first, actually, that would become the place where we attached our greatest sense of impact and purpose. And by the way, that would actually help solve so many of humanity's problems. Because really, what's the source of the greatest problems in the universe? It's human beings. Unfortunately, children who were neglected or, God forbid, abused, and so forth, and they turned out to be destructive. Not due to any choice of their own, but, God forbid, because they didn't receive the love, the attention, the care that they needed when they were young. And why? Because in some cases, their parents were busy seeking their purpose elsewhere, either at the office, which is classic, right? How many people at the end of their lives look back?
The workaholic,
the workaholic,
or the alcoholic, self-medicating.
All of that. Yeah. So that's point number one, family first. But it goes deeper than that, because there's a Kabbalistic idea that says that actually when you're in relationship with someone, let's take marriage, for example, again, in the modern world, so often we're accustomed to a certain transactionalism, a certain utilitarianism. So a guy meets a girl, they fall in love, and it's all wonderful. And social scientists say that, by the way, the period of falling in love lasts for about 18 months, the infatuation period. But post that period, real life kicks in, their interests might vary over time, they fall apart. What's the glue? What's the glue? How do you maintain a passionate, loving marriage or relationship long term? This is one of the great questions of our time, with divorce rates skyrocketing and so forth. So I believe that there's a certain piece of spiritual and intellectual furniture. There's a certain idea here that, if internalized profoundly, could really help people through some of the most difficult patches in their relationship. Now, there are times where a relationship has to end because it's so toxic, or because, God forbid, there's abuse. Yeah. And that's where anyone listening should seek the counsel of their personal mentor, mashpia, or rabbi, and so forth. But there are also a tremendous amount of cases where I think if this principle was internalized, marriages would fall back into love, and those couples would enjoy a very nourishing, satisfying, lifelong relationship. And that is, very often we tend to think to ourselves, why did I fall in love with this person? Because they're so funny, they're so intelligent, they're so witty, they're so beautiful.
Because they meet a need.
Exactly.
In me.
They meet a need, or they meet a desire.
Yeah.
However you quantify or qualify these very complex inner. But
it's all about how they fit my lack.
Yes, right. And essentially it's how they serve my vision of a spouse, of a partner, and so forth. But inevitably, what ends up happening is that all of those aspects, when life really happens and the going gets rough, all of those aspects sometimes are not fully manifest. And there will be times in a relationship where someone will say to themselves, well, I'm giving much more than I'm getting. And what happens in a business setting when you give more than you get? You end that relationship, you move on. It's no longer serving the particular needs for which you set out to achieve. And many people are applying that, I think, in relationships too. And so they're very quick to leave because they say...
Because it's become transactional.
Transactional. Mm-hmm. So what's the opposite of transactional? So this is this idea that teaches that actually your soul, was given another soul, and we actually refer to it as two halves of a soul, that is yours to cherish, that is yours to nourish, that is yours to love for an entire lifetime. That idea and actually, here's an interesting application idea. Yes, it's true you like blue eyes, or you like blonde hair, or you like someone who's funny, or you like someone who's intelligent. But why? Why is that what you like? And when you talk to your friend, or when you look around you, clearly they don't like what it is that you like. Who put those likes into you in the first place? Who built them into your internal composition and makeup such that those were the things that your spouse has and attracted you to them? All of those were built into you and your spouse in order to bring those two halves of the soul together to reveal and expose you to that essential spiritual truth. Suddenly, if that's the case, if this is part of my purpose, if my soul came into this world to look after this soul, suddenly if I'm giving more than I'm receiving, that's totally fine, because that's fully in line with
That's not something we ever fault in a parent and child relationship.
Exactly.
Of course we give more than we receive.
You put it so well.
And we receive so much by giving.
You put it so well.
Yeah.
In other words, the foundation is no longer what am I getting from this?
Yeah.
And I think actually you put it brilliantly, because if a parent would operate by the same principles with their child, we would say, well, that's not a healthy parent. Okay. Now I want to stress the obvious, because this could, if taken out of context, seem like we're suggesting that no matter how difficult the relationship is, no matter how difficult the partner is, and even if there's abuse, and even if that's not what we're saying
toxic,
whatsoever.
we're talking about a different
exactly
thing.
And yes, on some level, those needs have to be met. Those desires must be nurtured, because that's how you translate the essential connection into an overt, conscious, palpable connection, which is essential and integral, without a doubt. So by all means.
Right, but the reason we've we haven't digressed at all, but the reason we're talking about relationships and healthy relationships and nurturing relationships is because that is so related to the purpose question.
Exactly right. Yeah. If seen through the lens of purpose, suddenly one recognizes that if this is why my soul came into this world, then yes, I'm here. And this is forever. This is for life. Mm-hmm. And that helps us a lot. Because when one stops asking the question every morning, doing the cost-benefit analysis, punching in the numbers, doing the audit, no, that's not relevant anymore in this relationship. Right? So that's one, to whom this person was born. Then in which place this person was born. So location. That's a very big principle in the Rebbe's teachings. Where you are born, or where divine providence has brought you. Here too we apply this spiritual principle. So for example, you might think to yourself, well, I moved to this city because of a whole host of reasons. The education system is great. I moved to this neighborhood because I love the architecture, right? Yes, but the reason the architecture in that neighborhood by divine providence is such is in order to attract all of you to that place, because there are hidden divine sparks in that particular location for you to elevate.
Okay, so I'm starting to see that pattern. It's what I always talk about, that God's speaking to us in the language of events.
Exactly right.
Right? And so when you start to ask this question, you're feeling restless, it doesn't feel right, you're lacking purpose, and you say, well, I want to find my purpose, I need to find it. Rather than go seek out this guru in India, right? You start to examine, well, where am I?
Right.
What am I? Right. Who is around me?
Exactly.
And not what can they give me,
right?
What can I give them?
Right.
What can I give it? What can I build here? What is missing here?
Correct.
What is as a director, when I'm in production, which is the most insane, the hardest weeks of my life, and in a good way, I'm so thankful to be there, but it's the amount of energy and focus and concentration that it costs a director is almost unimaginable, because all day long, while you're focusing on getting the shots that you're going to need to craft this story and create a movie experience later for an audience in a theater, you have to keep that in mind while there's 100 questions coming at you constantly, right? Sal, what color should this costume be? Sal, where should this actor stand? Sal, do we want him, is he going to shout or not? Is this going to jibe with, is this the right gun or is that the wrong gun? Is there going to be a shoot? Whatever, there's just a million questions constantly. And invariably, someone will come and say, and there's a problem. There's a major problem. An actor is late, the costume is missing, there's a lawnmower that we can't shut off from the gardener next. There's a million problems. And one thing that I learned early on is, whoever brings you that problem, you can say to them, you noticed this problem. That's because you are the best positioned to solve it. Yeah. And we who observe problems in our world, it's because we were given the sight to see that there's a problem and probably the ability to do something about it.
Exactly. So once you start to look at the world that way, everything changes, because you find yourself in an ongoing conversation with the divine, and you're receiving whispers and nods and nudges and guidance, but you have to be aware. You have to be conscious of that. And I think most of us turn on our purpose lens naturally when we're looking at the bigger, sort of like I said earlier, global issues, rather than the immediate things that are right around us. And so there's another. So there's so many different elements to it. Talent.
I'm just going to say, we've been going for 57 minutes. So I tend to do the podcast, not too much longer than that.
Perfect.
So let's think that we got about another 10 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Could I get a bit more water?
Yeah.
And
Nina, let me know if there's anything that we should cover that we haven't.
No, it's pretty extensive. I have nothing in mind.
okay, let's see.
This one's still recording. Is that one still recording? That phone, is it still recording?
Yeah?
Good. Just checking. And the shot looks good?
Thank you so much.
I hope so.
Okay.
It's a little too late to do anything about it.
Okay.
It looks great to me.
Great.
Okay, okay. So, so a number of the other, so the idea here is again, that instead of going to that teacher or that guru, look internally, look at your inner makeup, look at your inner construct, and you will find many of the clues that will guide you to your purpose. And then there's another component which is, like you were saying, look at the events in your life, look at the location, look at the people around you. They too contain clues to your individual purpose. So let's talk for a moment a bit about the internal. What do we mean when we talk about the internal? So number one is, for example, personality. What kind of personality type are you? Another is talent. What are your talents in life? Those become very, very important components. What are your passions in life? One person is passionate about this cause, another is passionate about another cause. Don't write it off to chance. No, recognize that the reason you're passionate about animals, or you're passionate about education, or you're passionate about the climate, or you're passionate about hunger, is because God has planted a seed.
Exactly. You have a unique sensitivity that other people don't have.
Exactly right.
And that makes that's your superpower.
That is your superpower. The way the previous Rebbe puts it in that letter is, there's a saying in scripture, Zeh Sefer Toldat Adam, that he interprets to mean, your life is the book you need to both read and write. If you look into the specifics of your life, based on the principle that you were designed impeccably, perfectly, that is to say, every aspect of you, and we'll get to this in a moment, including your vices, including your struggles, and by the way, including your mistakes. All of those are part of the story and the book of your life. If you look into those, you will find tremendous, tremendous clarity. So talent, there's so many stories about talent in the chapter on talent, but one is an interesting one where there was a yeshiva student who actually started to skip school, and he was taking music lessons, and the yeshiva found out about it, and they brought it to the Rebbe's attention because they wouldn't send a child out of school unless they got his permission first. And the Rebbe said to them, this person's talent is integral to their life mission, and he actually encouraged the school to pay for the music lessons at the Juilliard Art School in Manhattan. And eventually this individual became a chazan. He prayed at 770 for the community. He started a choir, which performed at major events. That literally became his life purpose, bringing joy and connection and elevation to people through his music. Art, another interesting area where historically there was some tension between the religious community and the art world. Because historically the art world was very, was always into pushing the envelope and so on. And the Rebbe told a number of people the same thing, that the time has come to elevate art. The time has come where it is our mission to use this tremendous medium to bring to life and bring to light at certain insights that would otherwise remain static and one-dimensional. So talent, that's a big one. Passion, that's a big one. What are you passionate about? Personality, what's your personality? Are you, for example, are you ambitious? Are you reserved? Are you thoughtful? Are you articulate?
Empathic?
Are you
intuitive? Yeah.
Exactly. All of these things become clues. Okay, so this is the idea. They're all clues. In the end, it's about putting those clues together and connecting the dots through a particular particular pathway, which we'll get to in a moment.
Right, and because you embark on that search, doesn't mean you'll find the answer right away.
For sure.
But if you don't embark on the search, for sure you won't find the answer.
Exactly.
But if you keep on the search, you keep
Exactly.
asking the questions, then the clues, not only will you find more of them, but you, as a detective, you'll get better.
Excellent.
You will understand more what's coming your way.
And also, I think you make a great point. Because you're always on the lookout, it's not as if one's purpose is always limited to one thing. No, sometimes your purpose can change.
Yeah.
Sometimes, at a later point in life, you're being called in a different direction.
Yeah.
This is something so deep. And I had there was a yeshiva student who spent some time with us in London when we were starting our Chabad. So wonderfully talented and gifted young man. And I won't go into all this story, but later in life, he actually learned that he was sexually abused as a child. And
He learned. In other words, he blocked it out.
he blocked it out.
Wow.
It's a bit of a longer story, but he had at that point already become a Chabad shliach somewhere. So his mission, his purpose, you would think, was already defined. And he spoke to me, and we discussed this. And he shared with me that he had to make a critical choice. He was at a particular fork in the road. Do I continue my main, or what I had already arrived at as my purpose in life? Or is the fact that I gained this knowledge later in life, this devastating knowledge, does that mean, is this Hashem, the universe, communicating to me that now it's time to shift my focus and become an advocate for others to ensure that no one goes through what I went through? And he actually made the choice to pivot. And he spends quite a bit of time going around, giving talks. He's trying to affect legislature in his state. He's become an incredible voice. He's taken all the talents that, until that point, he was channeling a certain way, and now he was redirecting that to bring attention to an incredibly important cause. Why? Based on the principle we're talking about. Based on the idea that one's purpose is not necessarily monolithic.
Right.
It could be multifaceted, and it could evolve during life, as life progresses. And the way you'll know that is if you're listening, if you're observing, if you become aware. Another interesting thing is...
let me just add that because this has been such a... I've been on this journey, right? It became such an important part of my life. I had that feeling when I was young. I always felt like I was seeking. And eventually, I've told the story in other places, and it's not for this conversation right now, but eventually, thank God, I found my way. And thanks to the story of my grandmother, I found my way back to Judaism and to learning and eventually to teaching and sharing. But when you are on this journey, when you keep asking these questions, not only do answers come, and not only this feeling of well-being that we started by talking about, that if you have this sense of purpose, it's healthier, and you can feel that you're healthier. But I think, certainly in my life, and I don't think it's just because I'm so unique or lucky, you start to have moments where it's like a kiss from God.
Right.
There's just these little moments where because it's hard and every day you keep asking and it's not always easy to see your purpose and there's a lot of frustrating days that don't work.
Right.
But now and then, because you're thankful, because you say to God, I love you, and we're commanded to love God, and that means say with the words, with your mouth, I love you, God. I love you, God. The more you do that, the more you ask these questions, the more there will be these moments where you feel that kiss.
Exactly. And I think, look, some of this was actually beautifully summarized by Rabbi Sachs. I'm going to quote him because he said something really beautiful. He said, and some of you know this story, I didn't want to be a rabbi at the beginning of my career. I had an aspiration to be an economist, a lawyer. I had a dream of being an academic. I didn't think of becoming a rabbi until really quite late in life. I was very conscious that we were short of rabbis. That's what needed to be done. But I never saw that as something I wanted to do until the Rebbe lit that little spark, that flame in me. And all of a sudden, what I wanted to do became what needed to be done, and so I became a rabbi. And so that's one of his lines. He says, where what you want to do meets what needs to be done, that is where God wants you to be.
Yeah.
Put differently by a social philosopher, your purpose and vocation is where your greatest talents and the world's greatest needs come together.
Yeah.
So that's one element, okay? But then there's also reacting to events outside of yourself, right? So there's a very beautiful story, and there's a whole chapter on this. There was a blizzard in Michigan, in Detroit, and there was a Chabad women's convention there, and they reached out to the Rebbe to report, and one of the women said that we're stuck in Detroit. And the Rebbe's secretary responded, the Rebbe wants to know what you mean by you're stuck. So she says, well, stuck means, and she started to explain what the word means. And he said, no, the Rebbe wants you to understand, and he wants me to communicate to you that a Jew is never stuck. That wherever you are, you're there for a reason.
Yes.
Okay? So suddenly they went around and they started giving out Shabbos candles. And there are many women who light Shabbat candles every Friday night to this day because a group of women who thought they were stuck were taught by the Rebbe that a human or a Jew is never stuck. So that's learning how to react in real time to situations that seemingly set you back or direct you or redirect you from the main path of your purpose to your mind. Another just incredible story, I may have shared in the past, is Rabbis Jacobson, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Simon. Their father was a journalist, and he was the editor of the Allgemeiner Journal. And I believe he once had a heart attack before Yom Kippur. And he was in the hospital, and he was miserable, as you can imagine. And when his father went by, when his son, Simon, went by to receive the honey cake, the lekach, the Rebbe gave him a piece of cake for his father and said, tell your father that when he finishes the mission for which he was sent to the hospital, God will set him free. So he comes, he tells his father, and his father was transformed. Instantly after Yom Kippur, immediately after, the Rebbe's secretary reached out and asked Mr. Jacobson through his family, have you finished the mission for which you were sent? And the way I see it is that until that point, when he was in the hospital, he might have thought to himself, look, this is a departure from my purpose in life. This is an aberration. And if I had the choice to press a button and delete this from my life story, I would do so. Because this is taking me away from my mission, which is to bring knowledge and information and truth to the world. And suddenly, the Rebbe had exposed him and helped him don a different pair of glasses, the Hashgacha Pratis pair of glasses, that mystical spiritual perspective of synchronicity, where all of a sudden the person to his right and to his left were not fellow patients, they were fellow spiritual co-travelers, souls on a journey. Each one of them placed next to him by divine providence because there was something for him to achieve. The person coming in with the mask and the green apron was not a doctor, but was a soul that represented
Beautiful.
a family. And he began to speak to them about decency, the 7 Noahide laws, and Jewish principles if they were Jewish. Many years later, when he passed, at the Shiva, a doctor came and he told Mr. Jacobson's son, Simon, he said, I want you to know that there was a time when your father was my patient in the hospital, and he described this time. And he said, suddenly, I don't know what caused it, but he was activated, and he began to engage me in conversation about my spiritual life. And he said, I have to tell you that the conversations I had with him at that time changed the trajectory of my family's spiritual journey.
Wow.
Isn't that powerful?
Wow.
So that's reacting to the things that happen outside of us that are included in the book of our life that we are there to decipher and to really unpack those clues. Mistakes we've made. How many of us beat ourselves up? But those mistakes are too, even the traumatic events in our life. I'll tell you one very fascinating story I came across. There was a woman during the 60s and 70s. She went to the Far East and she began to explore other cultures, other traditions, other forms of spirituality, including idolatry. She had engaged very deeply and immersively in idolatrous practices. And it's a long story, but she ended up in Crown Heights for some reason, and something resonated. And at some point she had a yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe. And during her meeting, or maybe it was a letter she wrote to the Rebbe, excuse me, I just want to be very accurate here. But it's in the book, it's written out. And she said, I don't want to be around the false pretenses. And she said something to the effect of like, this is my past. This is who I was. I engaged in probably the most
Didn't
carnal.
her friends say, why are you going to send that letter to the Rebbe full of all these things that you've done in India? And she said, no, I have to send it.
Right.
Yeah.
So she sends this letter and, again, reflecting what was only natural to most of us, the thought that a real large portion of my life was wasted. Not only was it wasted, it didn't only not contribute to my purpose, it actually,
I'm ashamed of it.
I'm not only ashamed, but it actually took me further. It sullied my soul. You know, how can I ever retrieve that time? How can I ever redeem that time? The Rebbe responded with a very beautiful teaching. There's a teaching that says that if a person tells you, Lo yagati umatzati, that I didn't toil and yet I succeeded, or if they tell you,
I succeeded and I
did
didn't work.
toil, but I didn't succeed,
Right.
don't believe them. But if they said, I did toil and I succeeded, then you believe them. So the Rebbe says like this, the yagati, the toil, you've already done. That has led you to the current matzati that you have found. Listen to what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe is saying to her, all the searching you did in the Far East, which included things that yes, a Jew should never find themselves doing, all of that contributed, became part of the momentum and the impetus that brought you to the finding, to the discovery that you've experienced now in this stage of your life. Almost as if to say, if you hadn't done that searching, you would not have found yourself here.
Right.
Which is so true, by the way, for so many who left organized religion in the 70s or whatever because of the stale sense of formality and rote and the social, and they left it and they sought spirituality. The seeking itself may have brought them to places that are very, very antithetical to the oneness of Hashem. But if they didn't have that seeking, that search within them, would have never brought them to re-engage at a later point in Judaism in a much more deep and authentic and genuine place that qualitatively brought them into much deeper relationship with Judaism. Again, so the Rebbe is taking this person who looked at a part of their story and said, that part of my story was not part of my purpose. In fact, it was detrimental to my purpose. And the Rebbe is helping reframe that and redeem that period and explains how that literally led her to a much deeper engagement with Yiddishkeit and so on. So we look inside, we look outside, and then how do we take these clues and how do we turn them into a crystallized purpose for ourselves? There's an entire chapter about mashpia, which is a mentor, and a chaver tov, a friend, right? And that's a really important one because, we need an objective soundboard. And the Rebbe spoke at great length about identifying someone in your life who has that objectivity, who can listen to you and can receive those clues and help you discover which ones, how they come together in your particular life.
Very good. And of course, be careful who you place in such a role in your life. Has to be somebody whose values you respect.
Exactly right, and that's also part of that chapter.
Yeah.
Let me maybe just share, as we wrap up, a few words about the source of this wisdom, which is the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, because I think it's interesting. Many of the books that I've worked on have both been about the Rebbe and have not been about the Rebbe. That is to say, they've shared his wisdom, but they haven't been written as a biography. They might be maybe an intellectual biography. They might be showcasing some of the essential ideas that he contributed that continue to reverberate and resonate. The Rebbe led, as some will know, a very difficult life by objective standards. He lived through World War I, World War II, a refugee crisis, a typhus epidemic. His father was forcibly exiled and tortured by the Soviets. He ended up dying in Kazakhstan, etc. And, he lived through the biggest devastation of modern Jewish life, if you will, the Holocaust. And he lived at a time when very large portions of Jewry were really choosing to leave Judaism behind, which was so painful from, a religious leader. He also, of course, married the Rebbetzin, but they didn't have children. He also dealt with, the fears, the anxieties, the ambitions of millions of people over the years. And in every encounter, what the Rebbe sought to do, in every letter, in every yichidus, in every talk, in every discourse, you see the Rebbe trying to find the point of purpose at that moment, in that place, and in that person, and help set people on their course, on their journeys of purpose for life. And this flowed from this idea where I would say, to my mind, the Rebbe was one of the most purpose-driven and purpose-conscious leaders, spiritual teachers that I'm aware of. Every moment was accounted for. I'll share with you one little story that encapsulates this, perhaps better than any. The Rebbe was very busy, as you'll know, and there was a particular fellow who wanted to meet the Rebbe. He called up the secretariat, and they told him to come back in 10 months at 4 in the morning, which is, typical. But somehow he met up with maybe some of the yeshiva students or somebody who told him that there's a way to circumvent protocol. Every day the Rebbe leaves his home in the morning, and there's a few minutes or a minute or two between his home, and then he gets to the car, and then he goes to 770. You can accost the Rebbe at that time, and you can ask the Rebbe anything you want. There's no vetting process. And so that's exactly what he does. He shows up the next morning, and as the Rebbe leaves his home, he presents his question to the Rebbe. The Rebbe listens. They spend 6 or 7 minutes together. The Rebbe gives him guidance. The Rebbe goes to the car, goes to 770. He's very happy. He thinks that's the end of the story. And then suddenly, he notices that there are 2 yeshiva students coming across towards him from across the street. They had been observing this, and they began to admonish him. And they rebuked him. They said, how dare you steal the Rebbe's precious time in this way? There's a system. How dare you ambush the Rebbe in this way? He was very taken aback. And he sat down to write a note of apology to the Rebbe. And he apologized for doing what he did and for stealing the Rebbe's time in this way. And the Rebbe responded with 2 points. The first point was that the time that those yeshiva students accosted you was during Seder HaYeshiva, was during yeshiva hours. In other words, they had no business being there at that time. So first of all, don't take them so seriously.
Right, so
And then the Rebbe...
pay attention to who is rebuking you.
Exactly right. And then the Rebbe... Exactly. This is a lesson in itself. And then the Rebbe said to him, quoted a very famous teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said that a soul could descend and spend a lifetime on this earth, all, in order to do one favor for another human. Wow, what a teaching. Then the Rebbe writes to him, who knows, perhaps my soul came into the world just in order to have
This man who
conversation with
touched
you.
thousands and thousands of lives, inspired so much.
Think about that. Just
But
for
with
that
such
one.
humility said,
Think
maybe it was just to teach you, just to share this with you.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
And what I find incredible, and I later found that the Rebbe spelled this out at a Farbrengen, is that that's how the Rebbe lived every moment, every encounter. Perhaps this is the one. And if you can live that way, you will live a qualitatively, an exponentially different kind of life. Because you're seeking and you're finding the purpose in every moment, in every encounter.
Wow, beautiful.
That is so powerful. And that's how the Rebbe lived his life. And I think that's his legacy for each one of us. And that's how he took a generation of Holocaust survivors. And he turned them into the greatest task force of spreading light and love around the world. I don't know of anyone like my colleagues, my esteemed and illustrious brothers and sisters. And tragically, we lost one this week. Tragically,
Rabbi Tzvi
Rabbi
Kogan.
Kogan of blessed memory, who live purpose-driven lives in this way. There's no hours, right? There's no beginning and end to the day, to what they need to do, what they will do. They're in constant flow. They're in constant purpose, consciousness, and output. That's what the Rebbe taught, and that's what we all hopefully learn from the Rebbe. For me, at least, in my office, I have a picture of the Rebbe, and there's so many to choose from. But the one I have is the Rebbe giving out wine of blessing, kosher bracha, at the end of a festival. Think about it for a moment, okay? You can have a 2-day festival, maybe a 3-day festival like we had this year. Rabbi Yossi Jacobson once shared that he was one of the Rebbe's oral scribes, which means he would memorize everything that the Rebbe had spoken over Yom Tov. He said over a 3-day Yom Tov, if you translated the words the Rebbe said into printed paper, it could amount to 300 pages.
Oh my.
Think about that for a moment.
Wow.
Okay, and that actually, very often there were these long Farbrengens for 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, that would last into the wee hours of the morning. And the Rebbe presided over the services, and so on and so forth. And then you have Matzah Yom Tov. The festival concludes. Okay, what would anyone do? At this point, they're completely drained, completely exhausted. They make Havdalah, and then they go and they catch their breath.
Yeah.
The Rebbe didn't do that. He stood, he made Havdalah, and then he took the wine of blessing, and he spent another 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 hours distributing that wine of blessing to the thousands of people who would come from around that area to receive that blessing. I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. we had time after Yom Tov to get in the car, drive to New York, sometimes 2-hour drive, get in line and wait another 2 hours to receive Kos Shel Bracha.
Wow.
For me, that image will always, always embody this sense of purpose consciousness. Perhaps for this encounter, my soul came into this world. For this eye contact, for the bit of wine that I'm going to give to you, perhaps this is the reason my soul came into this world. That's, in essence, just a sampling of some of the ideas in the book, and hopefully
Spectacular.
it will help each of us tap into our purpose and live with and on purpose. Bezrat Hashem.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson, for being on the AT podcast today. The book is On Purpose by Rabbi Mendel Kalmenson. It's available wherever books are sold.
Sure, it's going to be on Amazon in a few weeks.
It's going to be on Amazon in a few weeks.
On kahat.com.
And kahat.com. I'm very excited to read it. I'm going to ask the rabbi to sign it for me right now.
Great pleasure.
And who knows, but it was for this conversation and this moment and this smile that we are exchanging now, that we both came into this world.
Wow.
Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.